Question 1. Investigation of a whistleblower report at Bilfinger suggests a potential misstatement in financial reporting related to a significant project in a jurisdiction with strict accounting standards. The report alleges that project costs were intentionally understated to meet internal performance targets. What is the most appropriate initial course of action for Bilfinger's compliance department? Option A. Initiate an immediate, thorough, and independent investigation into the allegations, involving relevant internal departments and potentially external advisors, while ensuring the whistleblower's confidentiality and protection from retaliation. Option B. Advise senior management to temporarily suspend all financial reporting related to the project until further clarification can be obtained through informal discussions with the project team. Option C. Dismiss the report as likely exaggerated due to internal performance pressures and focus on addressing the project's performance targets directly. Option D. Request the project manager to provide a revised report that corrects any potential misstatements, assuming the issue is a simple oversight. Correct answer is A. Initiate an immediate, thorough, and independent investigation into the allegations, involving relevant internal departments and potentially external advisors, while ensuring the whistleblower's confidentiality and protection from retaliation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's immediate financial interests and its long-term ethical and regulatory obligations. Bilfinger, as a global company, must navigate complex compliance landscapes. The challenge lies in identifying and acting upon potential breaches of regulatory frameworks, such as those governing financial reporting or anti-bribery, without compromising business operations or employee relationships. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between minor procedural deviations and significant misconduct that could lead to legal penalties, reputational damage, and loss of stakeholder trust. The correct approach involves a systematic and objective investigation, prioritizing factual evidence and adherence to established internal policies and external regulations. This approach ensures that any allegations are thoroughly examined, due process is followed, and appropriate actions are taken based on verified findings. This aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and the regulatory expectations for companies to maintain robust compliance programs and to act with integrity. Specifically, it upholds the spirit of regulations that mandate transparency, accountability, and the prevention of fraudulent or unethical activities. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate financial implications, without a thorough investigation, risks overlooking serious regulatory breaches. This could lead to continued noncompliance, potentially resulting in severe penalties and reputational harm. Another incorrect approach that involves premature judgment or disciplinary action without due process violates principles of fairness and can lead to legal challenges and damage employee morale. Furthermore, an approach that dismisses concerns due to the perceived minor nature of the issue without proper assessment could allow systemic problems to fester, ultimately posing a greater risk to Bilfinger. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with acknowledging the reported concern, followed by an objective assessment of its potential severity and regulatory implications. This should trigger a formal investigation process, guided by internal policies and relevant laws. The investigation should gather evidence, interview relevant parties, and consult with legal and compliance experts. Based on the findings, a reasoned decision should be made regarding corrective actions, which may include disciplinary measures, process improvements, or reporting to regulatory bodies. Throughout this process, maintaining confidentiality and impartiality is paramount. Question 2. Market research demonstrates that a key supplier to Bilfinger is also a significant investor in a competitor company. As a Bilfinger project manager, you have a close personal relationship with the senior management of this supplier. What is the most appropriate course of action to uphold Bilfinger's ethical standards and regulatory compliance? Option A. Immediately disclose the personal relationship and the supplier's investment in a competitor to your direct supervisor and the relevant compliance department at Bilfinger, and recuse yourself from any decisions involving this supplier. Option B. Inform the supplier that their investment in a competitor creates a conflict and suggest they divest their shares before continuing business with Bilfinger. Option C. Discreetly manage the supplier relationship to ensure Bilfinger receives favorable terms, without formally disclosing the personal connection or the competitor investment to avoid unnecessary complications. Option D. Continue to manage the relationship with the supplier as usual, assuming your professional judgment is not compromised by the personal connection or the supplier's investment. The correct answer is A. Immediately disclose the personal relationship and the supplier's investment in a competitor to your direct supervisor and the relevant compliance department at Bilfinger, and recuse yourself from any decisions involving this supplier. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Bilfinger, as a company operating within a regulated industry, must navigate potential conflicts of interest and ensure compliance with ethical standards and relevant regulations. The challenge lies in balancing business objectives with the imperative to act with integrity and avoid situations that could compromise trust or lead to regulatory scrutiny. Careful judgment is required to identify and mitigate risks associated with such relationships. The correct approach involves proactively identifying and disclosing the potential conflict of interest to the appropriate internal stakeholders at Bilfinger. This demonstrates transparency and allows the company to implement appropriate safeguards, such as recusal from decision-making processes related to the supplier or seeking independent review. This aligns with general principles of good corporate governance and ethical conduct, which are often underpinned by regulatory expectations for companies to manage conflicts of interest effectively. While specific Bilfinger internal policies would dictate the precise steps, the underlying principle is to ensure that decisions are made in the best interest of the company and its stakeholders, free from undue influence. An incorrect approach of proceeding without disclosure risks violating internal company policies and potentially regulatory requirements related to conflicts of interest in corporate governance. This could lead to decisions being perceived as biased, undermining the integrity of the procurement process and damaging Bilfinger's reputation. Another incorrect approach of downplaying the relationship's significance is ethically unsound and professionally negligent. It suggests an intent to circumvent established procedures and avoid scrutiny, which is contrary to the principles of accountability and transparency expected of employees in a reputable organization. This could also expose Bilfinger to reputational damage and potential regulatory sanctions if the undisclosed relationship leads to unfavorable outcomes or perceptions of impropriety. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a framework that prioritizes ethical considerations and regulatory compliance. This includes 1. Recognizing a potential conflict of interest. 2. Consulting relevant company policies and codes of conduct. 3. Disclosing the conflict to the designated authority or supervisor. 4. Cooperating with the company to implement appropriate mitigation strategies. 5. Maintaining objectivity and acting in the best interest of Bilfinger at all times. Question 3. The performance metrics show a significant increase in project delays and cost overruns on recent Bilfinger projects managed by a specific regional director. An internal review suggests that a key supplier, with whom the regional director has a long-standing personal relationship, may be consistently underperforming, leading to these issues. What is the most appropriate course of action for Bilfinger's senior management to ensure ethical conduct and regulatory compliance? Option A. Immediately terminate the contract with the supplier and reevaluate the regional director's performance, prioritizing a swift resolution to the project issues. Option B. Instruct the regional director to address the performance issues directly with the supplier and monitor the situation closely. Assuming the relationship is not a factor, Option C. Increase oversight on the regional director's project management without directly questioning the supplier relationship, focusing solely on improving project delivery timelines. Option D. Initiate a formal, independent investigation into the supplier's performance and the regional director's relationship, involving legal and compliance departments, to determine the extent of any conflict of interest and regulatory breaches before taking further action. Correct answer is A. Immediately terminate the contract with the supplier and reevaluate the regional director's performance, prioritizing a swift resolution to the project issues. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's immediate financial interests with its long-term ethical and regulatory obligations. Bilfinger, as a company operating within a regulated industry, must ensure its decision-making processes are not only commercially sound, but also compliant with all applicable laws and ethical standards. The challenge lies in identifying potential conflicts of interest and ensuring that decisions are made with integrity, transparency, and in the best interest of all stakeholders, not just short-term profitability. Careful judgment is required to navigate these competing pressures and uphold the company's reputation and legal standing. The correct approach involves a thorough, documented review process that prioritizes compliance and ethical considerations. This means actively seeking out and addressing potential conflicts of interest, ensuring all decisions align with Bilfinger's internal policies and external regulatory requirements, and maintaining clear communication with relevant parties. This approach is correct because it demonstrates a commitment to good corporate governance, risk management, and ethical conduct, which are fundamental to sustainable business operations and are often mandated by regulatory frameworks designed to prevent fraud, corruption, and unfair practices. An incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate cost savings without a comprehensive review risks significant regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and potential legal action. This could involve overlooking potential conflicts of interest, which is a direct violation of many ethical codes and anti-bribery regulations. Another incorrect approach, such as proceeding with a decision based solely on the recommendation of a single department without independent verification, bypasses crucial checks and balances. This can lead to decisions that are not in the best overall interest of Bilfinger, may violate procurement regulation, or could be influenced by undisclosed biases. Both of these incorrect approaches fail to uphold the principles of due diligence and accountability essential in a regulated business environment. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that includes 1. Identifying the core issue and its potential implications. 2. Gathering all relevant information, including performance data, regulatory requirements, and internal policies. 3. Assessing potential risks and benefits, with a strong emphasis on compliance and ethical considerations. 4. Consulting with relevant stakeholders and experts, particularly legal and compliance departments. 5. Documenting the decision-making process and the rationale behind the final choice. And 6. Implementing and monitoring the decision to ensure ongoing compliance and effectiveness. Question 4. When evaluating a potential business partnership for Bilfinger in a new market where local regulations are less stringent than those in Bilfinger's primary operating jurisdiction, which approach best ensures ethical conduct and regulatory compliance? Option A. Proceeding with the partnership based on general industry best practices, assuming they align with the local regulations. Option B. Adhering strictly to the less stringent local regulations of the new market to facilitate the partnership and avoid unnecessary complexity. Option C. Relying on the judgment of the local team to navigate the regulatory landscape, as they are most familiar with the immediate environment. Option D. Seeking guidance from Bilfinger's internal legal and compliance departments to determine the most stringent applicable regulatory framework and ethical standards, and applying those to the partnership. The correct answer is B. Adhering strictly to the less stringent local regulations of the new market to facilitate the partnership and avoid unnecessary complexity. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Bilfinger, as a global company, operates under diverse regulatory landscapes. Navigating potential conflicts between different jurisdictions' ethical standards and legal requirements, particularly when dealing with sensitive information or business practices, demands a robust decision-making framework. The core difficulty lies in ensuring compliance with the most stringent applicable regulations while upholding the company's ethical commitments, even when those might differ slightly across regions. This requires a proactive and informed approach to risk management and ethical conduct. The correct approach involves prioritizing the most stringent regulatory framework and ethical standards applicable to the situation. This means identifying all relevant jurisdictions and then applying the highest common denominator of legal and ethical requirements. This ensures that Bilfinger not only meets but exceeds the minimum standards, thereby mitigating legal and reputational risks. This approach is ethically sound as it demonstrates a commitment to responsible corporate citizenship and adherence to the highest professional standards, aligning with principles of integrity and due diligence expected of employees in regulated environments. An incorrect approach would be to assume that compliance with the local regulations of the less stringent jurisdiction is sufficient. This fails to acknowledge the potential extraterritorial reach of certain regulations and the company's overarching ethical obligations. It creates a significant risk of noncompliance, leading to potential fines, legal action, and severe reputational damage. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on personal judgment without consulting internal policies or seeking guidance from legal or compliance departments. This can lead to subjective interpretations of complex regulations and ethical dilemmas, increasing the likelihood of errors and breaches. A third incorrect approach is to ignore the issue altogether, hoping it will resolve itself. This is a dereliction of duty and demonstrates a lack of professional responsibility, exposing Bilfinger to substantial risks. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process when faced with such dilemmas. This typically involves 1. Identifying the relevant regulations and ethical standards from all applicable jurisdictions. 2. Assessing the potential risks and consequences of each course of action. 3. Consulting internal policies, procedures, and seeking advice from legal, compliance, or senior management. 4. Documenting the decision-making process and the rationale behind the chosen course of action. 5. Implementing the chosen course of action and monitoring its effectiveness. Question 5. Quality control measures reveal a potential deviation from specified material standards on a critical Bilfinger construction project. The project manager is under significant pressure to maintain the current construction schedule. Which of the following actions best demonstrates professional integrity and adherence to regulatory frameworks in this situation? Option A. Immediately halt construction on the affected section and initiate a thorough investigation into the material deviation, engaging the quality control department and relevant stakeholders to determine the appropriate corrective actions and impact on the schedule. Option B. Discreetly document the deviation internally but continue with the construction as planned, hoping that the issue will not be detected during subsequent inspections. Option C. Authorize the use of alternative materials that appear similar without formal approval or retesting to keep the project on schedule. Option D. Instruct the site team to proceed with the current construction phase, assuming the deviation is minor and will be rectified during a later stage of the project to avoid schedule delays. The correct answer is A. Immediately halt construction on the affected section and initiate a thorough investigation into the material deviation, engaging the quality control department and relevant stakeholders to determine the appropriate corrective actions and impact on the schedule. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for project progress with the imperative to adhere to Bilfinger's established quality control procedures and relevant regulatory frameworks. The pressure to meet deadlines can create a temptation to bypass or expedite quality checks, which could lead to significant risks, including project failure, reputational damage, and potential legal or regulatory noncompliance. Careful judgment is required to ensure that quality is not compromised for speed. The correct approach involves a commitment to the established quality control framework and a proactive communication strategy. This approach upholds professional integrity by prioritizing adherence to Bilfinger's internal standards and any applicable external regulations. It demonstrates a responsible attitude towards project execution, recognizing that robust quality control is fundamental to delivering a successful and compliant outcome. By engaging with the project team and the quality control department, this approach seeks to resolve the issue collaboratively and within the defined procedural boundaries, thereby mitigating risks and ensuring long-term project viability. An incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate project completion without addressing the quality control findings would represent a failure to uphold professional standards and potentially violate regulatory requirements. This could manifest as ignoring the identified issues, attempting to conceal them, or proceeding with work that has known defects. Such actions undermine the integrity of the quality control process, expose Bilfinger to significant risks, and could lead to severe consequences, including contractual breaches, client dissatisfaction, and regulatory penalties. Another incorrect approach would be to unilaterally decide to proceed without proper documentation or authorization, even if the intention is to rectify the issues later. This bypasses established protocols and creates a lack of transparency, making it difficult to track the issue and its resolution. It also fails to involve the necessary stakeholders who are responsible for quality assurance and risk management. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Identify the issue and its potential impact. 2. Consult relevant internal policies, procedures, and external regulations. 3. Communicate the issue clearly and promptly to all relevant parties, including the project team, management, and quality control. 4. Collaborate to find a solution that addresses the quality concerns while considering project timelines and constraints. 5. Document all decisions and actions taken. 6. Seek appropriate approvals before deviating from established procedures, if absolutely necessary and justifiable. Question 6. Analysis of a Bilfinger project manager's situation where a close personal friend is a key stakeholder in a potential vendor company being evaluated for a significant contract. The project manager is responsible for overseeing the vendor selection process. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Bilfinger project manager to ensure ethical conduct and maintain the integrity of the procurement process? Option A. Proceed with the vendor evaluation as planned, ensuring they remain objective and make the decision solely on the vendor's merits without mentioning the relationship. Option B. Discreetly advocate for the friend's company during internal discussions, highlighting their strengths while downplaying any potential weaknesses. Option C. Resign from their position to avoid any perception of conflict of interest without informing Bilfinger of the specific reason. Option D. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to Bilfinger's compliance department and their direct supervisor, requesting guidance on managing the potential conflict of interest. The correct answer is D. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to Bilfinger's compliance department and their direct supervisor, requesting guidance on managing the potential conflict of interest. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Bilfinger employee due to the potential conflict between a personal relationship and the company's ethical obligations. Maintaining objectivity and avoiding even the appearance of impropriety is paramount in professional conduct, especially when dealing with procurement or contractual matters. The core of the challenge lies in balancing personal relationships with the stringent requirements of ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. The correct approach involves immediate and transparent disclosure of the relationship to the appropriate Bilfinger management and compliance departments. This aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and ethical business practices, which typically mandate reporting of potential conflicts of interest. By disclosing, the employee allows Bilfinger to implement appropriate safeguards, such as reassigning responsibilities or conducting enhanced oversight, thereby protecting the company's interests and ensuring fair dealing. This proactive step demonstrates integrity and adherence to Bilfinger's internal policies and any relevant industry codes of conduct that emphasize transparency and the avoidance of conflicts of interest. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the vendor selection process without disclosure. This failure to report a potential conflict of interest is a serious ethical breach. It undermines the integrity of the procurement process, potentially leading to biased decision-making, unfair advantage for the related vendor, and reputational damage for Bilfinger. Such an action could also violate specific clauses in Bilfinger's Code of Conduct or anti-bribery and corruption policies, which often require employees to declare any personal relationships that could influence business decisions. Another incorrect approach would be to attempt to subtly influence the decision in favor of the related vendor, even without explicit financial gain. This is still a conflict of interest and a breach of professional duty. It demonstrates a lack of integrity and a disregard for the principles of fair competition and objective decision-making that are fundamental to ethical business operations. The appearance of favoritism, even if unintentional, can be as damaging as actual bias. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to resign from Bilfinger to avoid the conflict. While this might seem like a way to sidestep the issue, it fails to address the underlying ethical obligation to report and manage conflicts of interest within the company. Professionalism dictates addressing such issues directly and transparently, rather than avoiding them through resignation, which could be interpreted as an admission of wrongdoing or an unwillingness to uphold ethical standards. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear framework. 1. Identify the potential conflict. Recognize any situation where personal interests could compromise professional judgment or create an appearance of impropriety. 2. Consult company policy. Review Bilfinger's Code of Conduct, ethics policies, and conflict of interest guidelines. 3. Disclose promptly and transparently. Report the situation to the designated authority within Bilfinger, e.g., line manager, compliance officer. 4. Follow guidance. Adhere to the instructions provided by Bilfinger management or compliance regarding how to manage the conflict. 5. Maintain objectivity. Ensure all decisions are made based on merit, fairness, and the best interests of Bilfinger. Question 7. Quality control measures reveal minor deviations from specified material standards in a critical component being manufactured for a Bilfinger project. The project manager is under significant pressure to meet a tight delivery deadline. Which of the following actions best represents a professional and compliant response? Option A. Immediately halt all project activities related to this component and escalate the issue to senior management without any initial internal assessment. Option B. Instruct the production team to proceed with the component's assembly, assuming the deviations are insignificant and will not impact overall performance, to avoid delaying the project. Option C. Initiate a formal review of the deviations, documenting the findings and consulting with the engineering and quality assurance departments to determine the necessary corrective actions before proceeding with further manufacturing. Option D. Approve the use of the component as is, based on the project manager's experience, to ensure the deadline is met and address any potential issues post-delivery. The correct answer is C. Initiate a formal review of the deviations, documenting the findings and consulting with the engineering and quality assurance departments to determine the necessary corrective actions before proceeding with further manufacturing. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for project progress with the imperative to adhere to Bilfinger's established quality control procedures and relevant regulatory frameworks. The pressure to meet deadlines can create a temptation to bypass or expedite steps, which could compromise the integrity of the project and potentially expose Bilfinger to regulatory scrutiny or reputational damage. Careful judgment is required to ensure that quality is not sacrificed for speed. The correct approach involves a systematic review and documentation process, aligning with Bilfinger's internal quality management system and any applicable industry standards or regulations. This approach prioritizes thoroughness and compliance, ensuring that any deviations are identified, assessed, and addressed through proper channels. This upholds Bilfinger's commitment to quality and mitigates risks. An incorrect approach that involves overlooking the identified discrepancies to maintain the project timeline would be professionally unacceptable. This failure directly contravenes Bilfinger's quality control mandate and could lead to the delivery of a substandard product or service, potentially resulting in client dissatisfaction, contractual breaches, and regulatory noncompliance. Another incorrect approach, that of immediately escalating the issue without attempting an initial internal assessment or seeking clarification from the project team, could be inefficient and undermine team autonomy. While escalation is sometimes necessary, it should be a considered step after initial due diligence, not an automatic reaction that bypasses standard problem-solving protocols. A further incorrect approach, which is to accept the findings without further investigation and halt the project indefinitely, demonstrates a lack of problem-solving initiative and could unnecessarily disrupt operations. While quality is paramount, a balanced approach involves diagnosing the root cause and implementing corrective actions rather than a complete, potentially disproportionate halt. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the problem and its context, then evaluating potential solutions against established policies, ethical guidelines, and regulatory requirements. This involves seeking clarification, gathering evidence, assessing risks, and documenting the decision-making process. For situations like this, the framework would involve 1. Acknowledge and understand the quality control findings. 2. Consult Bilfinger's internal quality assurance procedures and relevant project specifications. 3. Engage with the project team to understand the context of the findings and potential causes. 4. Determine the appropriate course of action based on the severity of the findings and established protocols, which may include further investigation, corrective actions, or controlled deviations with proper authorization. 5. Document all steps taken and decisions made. Question 8. Quality control measures reveal that a recent project undertaken by Bilfinger in a new international market has encountered a situation where a local subcontractor's standard operating procedures appear to deviate from what Bilfinger's internal ethical guidelines would typically permit regarding labor practices. Bilfinger's project manager is unsure whether the subcontractor's practices are permissible under the specific laws of that new market or if they constitute a violation of Bilfinger's Global Code of Conduct. Option A. Immediately instruct the subcontractor to cease the non-compliant practices and enforce Bilfinger's global ethical standards, regardless of local laws. Option B. Halt all project activities until a thorough review of the local laws and Bilfinger's Global Code of Conduct is completed by the Internal Compliance Department and Legal Counsel, and clear guidance is provided. Option C. Advise the subcontractor to adjust their practices to align with Bilfinger's global ethical standards, but allow them to continue their current operations pending the outcome of the review. Option D. Proceed with the project as planned, assuming the subcontractor's practices are acceptable as long as they are legal in the local jurisdiction, and address any potential ethical concerns later if they escalate. The correct answer is A. Immediately instruct the subcontractor to cease the non-compliant practices and enforce Bilfinger's global ethical standards, regardless of local laws. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because Bilfinger, as a global company, must navigate the complexities of adhering to diverse regulatory environments while maintaining consistent ethical standards. The core difficulty lies in balancing the need for efficient project execution with the imperative to comply with specific, often stringent, legal and ethical requirements. Misinterpreting or disregarding these requirements can lead to significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and operational disruptions. Careful judgment is required to identify the applicable regulatory framework and to ensure all actions taken are in full compliance. The correct approach involves proactively seeking clarification from the relevant internal compliance department and potentially external legal counsel. This demonstrates a commitment to due diligence and a responsible approach to regulatory adherence. By engaging with experts, Bilfinger ensures that its actions are informed by the most current and accurate understanding of the applicable laws and guidelines. This proactive engagement is crucial for preventing potential violations and safeguarding the company's integrity. This aligns with general principles of corporate governance and ethical conduct, which mandate that companies operate within the bounds of the law and uphold high ethical standards. Specifically, it reflects a commitment to know your obligations and seek expert advice within a robust compliance framework. An incorrect approach of proceeding without seeking clarification risks violating Bilfinger's obligations under the relevant regulatory framework. This could manifest as a failure to meet specific reporting requirements, engage in prohibited practices, or adequately manage risks, all of which carry legal and ethical ramifications. Another incorrect approach of assuming existing internal policies are sufficient without verifying their applicability to the new situation is also problematic. Internal policies are often general, and specific project circumstances may trigger distinct regulatory obligations that are not covered. This can lead to unintentional noncompliance. Finally, an approach that prioritizes speed over compliance by making a hasty decision without proper consultation directly contravenes the principle of lawful and ethical operation, exposing Bilfinger to significant risks. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding the regulatory landscape relevant to their specific task and location. This involves identifying all applicable laws, regulations, and internal policies. When faced with ambiguity or novel situations, the framework dictates seeking expert advice from internal compliance teams or external legal counsel. This iterative process of identification, consultation, and verification ensures that decisions are not only commercially sound, but also legally and ethically defensible. Question 9. Research into a new project at Bilfinger has revealed that a key supplier being considered for a significant contract is owned by a close personal friend of the project manager. The project manager has a history of successful collaborations with this supplier on previous, smaller engagements. What is the most appropriate course of action for the project manager to take in this situation? Option A. Proceed with evaluating the supplier's bid as normal, confident that their professional judgment will not be compromised by the personal relationship. Option B. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to their line manager and the Bilfinger compliance department, requesting guidance on how to proceed and offering to recuse themselves from the final decision if deemed necessary. Option C. Inform their line manager of the relationship, but suggest that it is not significant enough to warrant any special procedures. Proceeding with the evaluation, Option D. Secretly investigate the supplier's bid to ensure no preferential treatment is given, without informing management of the personal connection. Correct answer is B. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to their line manager and the Bilfinger compliance department, requesting guidance on how to proceed and offering to recuse themselves from the final decision if deemed necessary. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Bilfinger, as a company operating within a regulated industry, must navigate potential conflicts of interest and ensure compliance with ethical standards and relevant regulations. The decision-maker must balance business objectives with the imperative to act with integrity and avoid situations that could compromise their professional judgment or the company's reputation. Careful judgment is required to identify and mitigate risks associated with such relationships. The correct approach involves a proactive and transparent disclosure process. By immediately informing their line manager and the relevant department, e.g., legal or compliance, about the potential conflict of interest, the individual demonstrates adherence to ethical principles of honesty and integrity. This allows Bilfinger to formally assess the situation, implement appropriate safeguards, and make an informed decision on how to proceed, thereby upholding regulatory requirements and internal policies designed to prevent undue influence or preferential treatment. This aligns with general principles of corporate governance and ethical conduct expected in professional environments, which often mandate disclosure of potential conflicts. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the project without disclosing the relationship. This failure to disclose constitutes a breach of trust and potentially violates internal company policies and ethical codes of conduct. It creates an environment where decisions could be perceived as biased, undermining the integrity of the project and Bilfinger's operations. Furthermore, it could lead to regulatory scrutiny if the conflict of interest is later discovered, resulting in reputational damage and potential penalties. Another incorrect approach would be to downplay the significance of the relationship or to assume that it will not influence decision-making. This is a form of self-deception that ignores the inherent risk of perceived or actual bias. Professional decision-making in such situations requires an objective assessment of potential impacts, not subjective assurances. Relying on personal integrity alone, without formal disclosure and management, is insufficient to meet regulatory and ethical obligations. The professional decision-making framework to be used in similar situations involves a structured approach. 1. Identify the potential conflict. Recognize any situation where personal interests could interfere with professional duties. 2. Disclose promptly and transparently. Inform the appropriate authority within the organization, manager, compliance, legal, as soon as the conflict is identified. 3. Seek guidance and follow procedures. Adhere to the organization's established policies and procedures for managing conflicts of interest. 4. Recuse if necessary. Be prepared to step away from decision-making processes where the conflict cannot be adequately managed. 5. Document all actions. Maintain records of disclosures, discussions, and decisions made. Question 10. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a potential client in a country with strict anti-corruption laws has expressed a desire for a significant gift from Bilfinger to celebrate a recent successful project collaboration. Bilfinger's internal code of conduct has general guidelines on gifts and hospitality, but the specific local regulations in the client's country are not immediately clear. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Bilfinger representative? Option A. Consult Bilfinger's internal compliance department and research the specific local laws and regulations regarding gifts and hospitality in the client's country before making any decision. Option B. Inform the client that Bilfinger cannot offer any gifts due to the strictness of its internal policies without investigating local laws. Option C. Proceed with a gift that is within the general limits of Bilfinger's internal code of conduct, assuming it will be acceptable given the importance of the client relationship. Option D. Offer a gift that is slightly above the general limits of Bilfinger's internal code of conduct, rationalizing that it is a customary gesture in that country and crucial for maintaining the business relationship. The correct answer is A. Consult Bilfinger's internal compliance department and research the specific local laws and regulations regarding gifts and hospitality in the client's country before making any decision. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Bilfinger, as a global company, operates under diverse regulatory landscapes. navigating potential conflicts between its internal code of conduct and local legal requirements, especially concerning gifts and hospitality, demands careful judgment. The core of the challenge lies in ensuring compliance with the most stringent applicable regulations while upholding ethical standards, preventing even the appearance of impropriety. The correct approach involves a proactive and diligent verification process. This entails consulting Bilfinger's internal compliance department and seeking clarification on the specific local regulations governing gifts and hospitality in the target country. This approach is correct because it prioritizes adherence to both company policy and the law, mitigating legal and reputational risks. It demonstrates a commitment to ethical business practices and due diligence, which are paramount in maintaining trust with clients, partners, and regulatory bodies. This aligns with general principles of corporate governance and anti-bribery legislation, which often require robust compliance programs and risk assessments. An incorrect approach would be to assume that Bilfinger's standard policy is sufficient without verifying local laws. This is ethically and legally flawed because it risks violating local anti-bribery and corruption laws, which can carry severe penalties. It also demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a potential disregard for the specific risks associated with operating in a particular jurisdiction. Another incorrect approach would be to proceed with the gift based on the client's perceived importance or the potential for future business. This is a dangerous ethical lapse, as it prioritizes commercial gain over compliance and integrity. It opens Bilfinger to accusations of bribery or undue influence, damaging its reputation and potentially leading to legal repercussions. This approach ignores the fundamental principle that business relationships should be built on merit and transparency, not on the exchange of potentially compromising gifts. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying potential risks, such as those related to gifts and hospitality in foreign jurisdictions. This should be followed by a thorough information-gathering phase, including consulting internal compliance and legal teams, and researching relevant local laws and regulations. The next step involves evaluating the identified risks against company policies and legal requirements, and then selecting the course of action that ensures the highest level of compliance and ethical conduct. Finally, documenting the decision-making process and the rationale behind the chosen action is crucial for accountability and future reference. Question 11. Comparative studies suggest that the integrity of the hiring process is paramount for organizational success. During the Bilfinger hiring assessment test, a candidate exhibits behavior that raises concerns about their honesty and adherence to professional standards, potentially indicating a breach of the assessment's integrity. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the Bilfinger assessor? Option A. Ignore the behavior, assuming it is a minor issue or a misunderstanding, to avoid disrupting the assessment process and potentially impacting the candidate's overall score. Option B. Immediately terminate the assessment and inform the candidate that their behavior is unacceptable and disqualifies them. Option C. Directly question the candidate about their behavior during the assessment to understand their intentions and clarify the situation. Option D. Document the observed behavior and escalate it through the appropriate internal channels for further investigation and review, without directly confronting the candidate during the assessment. The correct answer is D. Document the observed behavior and escalate it through the appropriate internal channels for further investigation and review, without directly confronting the candidate during the assessment. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's immediate financial interests and its long-term ethical and regulatory obligations. Bilfinger, as a global entity, must navigate complex compliance landscapes. The challenge lies in identifying and acting upon potential misconduct without compromising business operations or employee morale, while strictly adhering to the Bilfinger hiring assessment test's specified regulatory framework. Careful judgment is required to balance these competing demands. The correct approach involves a systematic, evidence-based investigation that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. This approach is right because it aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and the implied regulatory expectations of a professional hiring assessment. By initiating a formal, documented investigation, Bilfinger demonstrates a commitment to upholding its integrity and adhering to any applicable codes of conduct or whistleblower protection policies that would be relevant in a hiring context. This proactive stance minimizes legal and reputational risks. An incorrect approach that involves ignoring the information or dismissing it without due diligence is ethically and regulatorily unsound. This failure to investigate potential misconduct, especially if it relates to the integrity of the hiring process or the suitability of a candidate, could lead to regulatory penalties, damage to Bilfinger's reputation, and the potential hiring of an unsuitable individual. Another incorrect approach, such as confronting the individual directly without a structured investigation, risks prejudicing any subsequent formal process, violating principles of fairness, and potentially creating legal liabilities for Bilfinger. This could also lead to the destruction of evidence or the premature departure of the individual, hindering a thorough assessment. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with acknowledging the information received. This should be followed by an objective assessment of its credibility and potential impact. If the information warrants further scrutiny, a structured, confidential investigation should be initiated, adhering to established company policies and relevant regulatory guidelines. This process should involve gathering evidence, interviewing relevant parties, if necessary and appropriate, and documenting all findings. The ultimate decision should be based on the evidence and in accordance with Bilfinger's internal policies and applicable regulations. Question 12. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of environmental noncompliance for the new Bilfinger construction project in the specified jurisdiction. The project timeline is aggressive, and the project manager is eager to commence site preparation immediately to meet deadlines. What is the most appropriate course of action for Bilfinger? Option A. Expedite site preparation and address environmental concerns only if specifically flagged by local authorities during the project's progress. Option B. Delegate the responsibility for environmental compliance to the on-site construction team, trusting their experience to manage any unforeseen environmental concerns. Option C. Proceed with site preparation, assuming that standard industry environmental protocols are sufficient, and address any potential issues that may arise later. Option D. Halt all site preparation until a comprehensive environmental impact assessment is completed and all necessary permits are secured, consulting with local environmental regulatory bodies and legal counsel. Correct answer is D. Halt all site preparation until a comprehensive environmental impact assessment is completed and all necessary permits are secured, consulting with local environmental regulatory bodies and legal counsel. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate financial implications of a project with the long-term reputational and legal risks associated with noncompliance. Bilfinger, as a global company, operates under a complex web of regulations, and understanding the specific requirements of the Bilfinger hiring assessment test jurisdiction is paramount. The decision-making process must prioritize adherence to established legal and ethical frameworks over expediency. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the project's scope against the Bilfinger hiring assessment test jurisdiction's regulatory framework, specifically focusing on any requirements related to environmental impact assessments or permits for construction projects of this scale. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the potential for non-compliance identified in the risk matrix. By seeking expert advice and ensuring all necessary approvals are obtained before proceeding, Bilfinger demonstrates a commitment to legal and regulatory adherence, thereby mitigating potential fines, project delays, and reputational damage. This aligns with the principles of responsible corporate conduct and due diligence expected under most regulatory regimes. Proceeding with the project without confirming environmental compliance, despite the risk matrix highlighting it, represents a significant regulatory failure. This approach disregards the potential for substantial fines, legal challenges, and mandatory project cessation, all of which could severely impact Bilfinger's operations and financial standing. It also demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for environmental protection laws. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that standard industry practices are sufficient without verifying specific jurisdictional requirements. While industry best practices are valuable, they do not supersede explicit legal mandates. Relying solely on these without explicit confirmation of compliance with the Bilfinger hiring assessment test jurisdiction's regulations is a risky assumption that could lead to violations. A professional decision-making framework for such situations involves 1. Risk identification. acknowledging and understanding the risks presented by the risk matrix. 2. Information gathering, actively seeking all relevant information, including specific regulatory requirements and expert opinions. 3. Impact assessment, evaluating the potential consequences of different courses of action, both positive and negative, in terms of legal, financial, and reputational factors. 4. Decision and justification, selecting the option that best aligns with legal obligations and ethical principles, and being able to clearly articulate the rationale behind the decision. 5. Monitoring and review, continuously monitoring the situation to ensure ongoing compliance. Question 13. Regulatory review indicates that a client of Bilfinger has inquired about potential investment strategies related to a specific industry sector, mentioning that they have heard rumors of significant upcoming developments that could impact companies within that sector. The Bilfinger analyst handling the inquiry is aware of some preliminary, unconfirmed discussions within Bilfinger that might align with these rumors, but this information has not been officially disclosed by any company or regulatory body. The analyst must decide how to respond to the client's inquiry. Option A. Advise the client based on the unconfirmed discussions within Bilfinger, emphasizing that the information is not yet public but is likely to be accurate. Option B. Decline to provide any specific investment advice related to the sector until all relevant information is officially disclosed and publicly available, and then offer to analyze the publicly disclosed information. Option C. Proceed with advising the client based on the unconfirmed discussions, but include a strong disclaimer that the information is speculative and the client should conduct their own due diligence. Option D. Provide general market commentary on the sector, including a disclaimer that the advice is based on publicly available information and market speculation, without directly addressing the client's rumors. The correct answer is A. Advise the client based on the unconfirmed discussions within Bilfinger, emphasizing that the information is not yet public, but is likely to be accurate. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the potential conflict between a client's immediate financial interests and Bilfinger's ethical obligations regarding the disclosure of material non-public information. The core of the challenge lies in navigating the fine line between providing legitimate, publicly available advice and inadvertently revealing or acting upon information that could be construed as insider trading. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with regulatory frameworks designed to maintain market integrity and fairness. The correct approach involves prioritizing the integrity of the market and adhering strictly to regulations concerning the use of material non-public information. This means that any advice given to the client must be based solely on information that is already in the public domain or has been formally disclosed by the relevant entities. This approach upholds Bilfinger's commitment to ethical conduct and regulatory compliance, preventing any appearance or reality of insider trading, which carries severe legal and reputational consequences. An incorrect approach that involves providing advice based on the analyst's hunch or unconfirmed information from a confidential source is fundamentally flawed. This directly violates regulations prohibiting the use of material non-public information for trading or advising others to trade. Such an action would expose both the analyst and Bilfinger to significant legal penalties, regulatory sanctions, and irreparable damage to their reputation for integrity. Another incorrect approach, which is to proceed with the advice but add a vague disclaimer about market volatility, does not absolve Bilfinger of responsibility. The disclaimer is insufficient if the underlying advice is tainted by non-public information. Regulators would look beyond the disclaimer to the substance of the advice and the information it was based upon. This approach demonstrates a lack of genuine commitment to regulatory compliance and ethical practice. Finally, an incorrect approach that involves delaying the advice until the information is officially released, without actively seeking to confirm its public availability or understanding the source of the client's inquiry, misses an opportunity to provide legitimate, compliant advice. While caution is good, an overly passive stance can be detrimental if the client's inquiry stems from a legitimate public development that Bilfinger could have analyzed and advised on using only public data. The professional reasoning framework should involve a clear process. First, identify the nature of the information in question. Second, determine if it is material and non-public. Third, if it is, refrain from any action or advice related to it. Fourth, if it is public, proceed with analysis and advice based solely on that public information. And fifth, always err on the side of caution and seek clarification from compliance if there is any doubt. Question 14. Consider a scenario where you are a Bilfinger employee involved in the evaluation of a tender for a significant project. You discover that one of the bidding companies is owned by a close personal friend with whom you have a long-standing relationship. This friend has not disclosed this relationship to Bilfinger. How should you proceed to ensure professional integrity and compliance with Bilfinger's assessment guidelines? Option A. Immediately disclose your personal relationship with the bidding company's owner to your superior and recuse yourself from any further involvement in the tender evaluation process. Option B. Proceed with the evaluation as normal, assuming your professional judgment is not influenced by the personal relationship, and do not disclose it to avoid potential complications. Option C. Ignore the relationship and continue with the evaluation, hoping that your friend's company is not selected, thus avoiding the need for disclosure. Option D. Discreetly try to influence the evaluation committee to favor your friend's company, believing it will not be discovered and will benefit both your friend and Bilfinger through a successful partnership. The correct answer is A. Immediately disclose your personal relationship with the bidding company's owner to your superior and recuse yourself from any further involvement in the tender evaluation process. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Bilfinger, as a global company, operates under various regulatory frameworks. However, for the purpose of this assessment, you must strictly adhere to the specified jurisdiction for the Bilfinger hiring assessment test. The challenge lies in identifying the most appropriate decision-making framework when faced with a potential conflict of interest, ensuring compliance with the relevant ethical codes and company policies, without resorting to personal gain or compromising professional integrity. Careful judgment is required to navigate the nuances of disclosure and recusal. The correct approach involves transparently disclosing the potential conflict of interest to the appropriate authority within Bilfinger, and recusing oneself from the decision-making process related to the contract award. This aligns with fundamental ethical principles of integrity and objectivity, and is typically mandated by professional codes of conduct and internal company policies designed to prevent conflicts of interest. Such disclosure ensures that decisions are made impartially and in the best interest of Bilfinger, free from personal bias. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the evaluation without disclosing the relationship. This constitutes a failure to uphold professional integrity and transparency, potentially violating ethical codes that require individuals to avoid situations where personal interests could improperly influence professional judgment. It also risks breaching company policies on conflicts of interest, which are designed to protect the company's reputation and ensure fair business practices. Another incorrect approach is to attempt to influence the decision in favor of the acquaintance's company. This is a direct violation of ethical principles of fairness and impartiality, and likely contravenes company policies and potentially legal regulations regarding procurement and contract awards. It represents a severe breach of trust and professional conduct. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to ignore the situation and hope it goes unnoticed. This demonstrates a lack of ethical awareness and responsibility. It not only fails to address the potential conflict, but also creates a risk of future repercussions if the undisclosed relationship comes to light, potentially damaging both the individual's career and Bilfinger's reputation. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear framework. 1. Identify the potential conflict of interest. 2. Consult relevant company policies and ethical guidelines. 3. Disclose the conflict to the designated authority. 4. Seek guidance on recusal or other appropriate actions. 5. Act in accordance with the guidance received, prioritizing the company's best interests and ethical standards. Question 15. Benchmark analysis indicates that Bilfinger is pursuing a significant infrastructure project in a region with a known history of corruption. To secure this contract, Bilfinger is considering engaging a local intermediary who has strong connections but whose business practices are not fully transparent. What is the most appropriate decision-making approach for Bilfinger in this situation? Option A. Engage the intermediary but instruct them to avoid any actions that could be perceived as unethical, without formal checks or contractual safeguards. Option B. Proceed with engaging the intermediary based on their stated connections and the urgency of securing the contract, assuming they will operate ethically. Option C. Conduct thorough due diligence on the intermediary, including background checks, verification of their business activities, and ensuring robust anti-bribery clauses in the contract, even if it delays the contract signing. Option D. Rely on the intermediary's self-certification of compliance with anti-bribery laws, without independent verification. The correct answer is C. Conduct thorough due diligence on the intermediary, including background checks, verification of their business activities, and ensuring robust anti-bribery clauses in the contract, even if it delays the contract signing. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the potential conflict between a company's immediate financial interests and its long-term ethical and regulatory obligations. Bilfinger, as a global company, must navigate complex compliance landscapes. The core of the challenge lies in balancing the pressure to secure a lucrative contract with the imperative to adhere strictly to anti-bribery and corruption regulations, which are paramount in maintaining business integrity and avoiding severe legal and reputational damage. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all business development activities are conducted with the highest ethical standards and in full compliance with applicable laws. The correct approach involves a thorough due diligence process that proactively identifies and mitigates risks associated with third-party intermediaries. This approach prioritizes transparency, integrity, and adherence to regulatory frameworks such as the UK Bribery Act 2010, which imposes strict liability on companies for failing to prevent bribery. By conducting comprehensive background checks, verifying the legitimacy of the intermediary services, and ensuring clear contractual terms that prohibit illicit payments, Bilfinger demonstrates a commitment to ethical business practices and regulatory compliance. This proactive stance is crucial for preventing potential violations and safeguarding the company's reputation and legal standing. An incorrect approach that involves proceeding with the contract without adequate due diligence on the intermediary would represent a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This would expose Bilfinger to the risk of engaging with a party involved in bribery or corruption, thereby violating the principles of the UK Bribery Act and potentially other anti-corruption laws. Such a failure could lead to severe penalties, including substantial fines, debarment from future contracts, and irreparable damage to the company's reputation. Another incorrect approach, which is to rely solely on the intermediary's assurances of compliance without independent verification, also constitutes a regulatory and ethical lapse. While the intermediary may claim to operate ethically, the responsibility for ensuring compliance ultimately rests with Bilfinger. A failure to independently verify these claims means Bilfinger is not taking reasonable precautions to prevent bribery, a key element in assessing corporate liability under anti-bribery legislation. A third incorrect approach, which is to overlook potential red flags due to the urgency of securing the contract, demonstrates a prioritization of short-term gain over long-term ethical and legal integrity. This disregard for warning signs, such as unusually high commission rates or a lack of transparency in the intermediary's operations, signals a willingness to compromise ethical standards and potentially engage in or facilitate corrupt practices. This directly contravenes the spirit and letter of anti-bribery legislation and undermines the principles of corporate responsibility. Professionals should employ a robust decision-making framework that integrates risk assessment, ethical considerations, and regulatory compliance at every stage of business development. This framework should include clear policies and procedures for engaging third parties, mandatory due diligence for all intermediaries, and regular training for employees on anti-bribery and corruption laws. When faced with situations involving potential risks, professionals should escalate concerns to senior management and legal counsel to ensure that decisions are made with full awareness of the legal and ethical implications. The ultimate goal is to foster a culture of integrity where compliance is not seen as a burden, but as a fundamental aspect of sustainable business success. Question 16. The investigation demonstrates that a significant discrepancy exists between the technical capabilities claimed in Bilfinger's bid proposal for a major infrastructure project and the documented evidence of their past performance in similar projects. The project team is eager to submit the bid, emphasizing the competitive advantage these claimed capabilities would provide. What is the most appropriate course of action for Bilfinger in this situation? Option A. Proceed with the bid as submitted, assuming the claimed capabilities are achievable with minor effort and that the client will not scrutinize the details rigorously. Option B. Submit the bid with a general disclaimer acknowledging that some technical claims are aspirational and may require further development, without specifying the exact nature of the discrepancy. Option C. Immediately withdraw from the bidding process due to the identified discrepancy, as any submission would be based on potentially false pretenses. Option D. Conduct a thorough, independent review of all claims made in the bid proposal, cross-referencing them with verifiable data and internal records, and revise the proposal to accurately reflect Bilfinger's proven capabilities before submission. The correct answer is A. Proceed with the bid as submitted, assuming the claimed capabilities are achievable with minor effort and that the client will not scrutinize the details rigorously. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire to secure a significant contract and the ethical obligation to ensure all representations made during the bidding process are accurate and compliant with regulatory standards. Bilfinger, as a global entity, must navigate complex procurement regulations, which often mandate transparency and truthful disclosure. The challenge lies in balancing competitive pressures with the imperative to uphold integrity and avoid misleading potential clients, which could lead to severe legal and reputational consequences. The correct approach involves a thorough, evidence-based review of all claims made in the bid proposal, specifically focusing on the technical capabilities and past performance data. This approach prioritizes accuracy and compliance, aligning with the principles of fair competition and regulatory adherence. By verifying each assertion against documented evidence and internal records, Bilfinger ensures its bid is not only competitive but also legally sound and ethically defensible. This proactive stance mitigates risks associated with misrepresentation, which can invalidate bids, incur penalties, and damage the company's standing. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the bid without independent verification, relying solely on the initial assurances from the project team. This fails to acknowledge the potential for human error, misinterpretation, or even intentional exaggeration. Such an approach risks violating regulatory requirements that demand factual accuracy in all submissions. Another incorrect approach would be to downplay the discrepancies and proceed with a vague disclaimer. This is ethically questionable as it attempts to circumvent the spirit of the regulations by acknowledging a potential issue without adequately addressing it, thereby still misleading the client. Finally, an approach that prioritizes winning the contract above all else, even if it means overlooking or glossing over the identified inaccuracies, represents a severe ethical and regulatory failure. This prioritizes short-term gain over long-term integrity and compliance, exposing Bilfinger to significant risks. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying potential conflicts or risks. This is followed by gathering all relevant facts and evidence, consulting applicable regulations and internal policies, and evaluating the potential consequences of different courses of action. Seeking advice from legal or compliance departments is crucial when uncertainties arise. The ultimate decision should be guided by principles of integrity, transparency, and adherence to the regulatory framework, even if it means foregoing a potentially lucrative opportunity. Question 17. The analysis reveals that a Bilfinger hiring manager, responsible for assessing candidates for a critical project role, discovers that one of the shortlisted candidates is a close personal friend with whom they have a long-standing relationship. The hiring manager believes this candidate is highly qualified for the role. What is the most appropriate course of action for the hiring manager to ensure the integrity of the hiring process and comply with professional standards? Option A. Disclose the personal relationship to their direct supervisor or the HR department and recuse themselves from the final decision-making process for this candidate. Option B. Proceed with the assessment as normal, confident that their professional judgment will not be compromised by the personal relationship. Option C. Avoid any direct interaction with the candidate during the assessment process, but continue to participate in the evaluation and decision-making. Option D. Discreetly advocate for their friend during the assessment discussions, highlighting their strengths to ensure they are considered favorably. The correct answer is A. Disclose the personal relationship to their direct supervisor or the HR department, and recuse themselves from the final decision-making process for this candidate. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires navigating a potential conflict of interest and ensuring compliance with Bilfinger's internal policies and relevant regulatory frameworks, which are assumed to be aligned with UK financial services regulations and SISI guidelines for the purpose of this assessment. The core issue is maintaining objectivity and avoiding any perception of impropriety when a personal relationship could influence professional judgment. Careful judgment is required to uphold ethical standards and protect the integrity of Bilfinger's operations and client relationships. The correct approach involves proactively disclosing the personal relationship to the appropriate internal authority at Bilfinger and recusing oneself from any decision-making processes that could be influenced by this relationship. This demonstrates transparency, adherence to conflict of interest policies, and a commitment to ethical conduct. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of integrity and due care expected of professionals under SISI guidelines, which emphasize acting in the best interests of the firm and its clients, and avoiding situations where personal interests could compromise professional duties. Regulatory frameworks in the UK also mandate robust conflict of interest management for financial services firms. An incorrect approach of proceeding with the assessment without disclosure risks, violating Bilfinger's internal conflict of interest policy, and potentially breaching regulatory requirements for managing conflicts. This could lead to biased decision-making, unfair treatment of the candidate, and damage to Bilfinger's reputation. Another incorrect approach of attempting to subtly influence the assessment process in favor of the acquaintance, even if not explicitly stated, is a severe ethical and regulatory breach. This undermines the fairness and objectivity of the hiring process and constitutes a failure of professional integrity. It directly contravenes the duty to act with honesty and impartiality. A further incorrect approach of ignoring the relationship and hoping it doesn't impact the assessment is negligent and unprofessional. It fails to proactively manage a known risk and leaves the situation open to unconscious bias, which can be as damaging as overt favoritism. This demonstrates a lack of diligence and a disregard for established ethical protocols. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency and adherence to policy. When a potential conflict of interest arises, the first step is to identify it. The next step is to consult relevant internal policies and external regulations. If a conflict exists, the professional should then communicate the situation to their supervisor or designated compliance officer and seek guidance on the appropriate course of action, which typically involves recusal from the affected decision. This structured approach ensures that all potential conflicts are managed responsibly and ethically. Question 18. The evaluation methodology shows that a Bilfinger project team is tasked with analyzing large datasets provided by a client to identify operational efficiencies. The data contains sensitive client information. The project manager is under pressure to deliver findings quickly. Which of the following approaches best demonstrates adherence to regulatory requirements and professional ethics in handling this data? Option A. Anonymize the client data thoroughly to remove all personally identifiable information before commencing any analysis, ensuring that the analysis is conducted on de-identified data. Option B. Proceed with the analysis of the raw client data, assuming that the internal project team constitutes a limited audience, and that the findings will remain confidential within Bilfinger. Option C. Request the client to sign a broad waiver allowing Bilfinger to use their raw data for any internal analysis deemed necessary for project improvement, without specifying the exact nature of the analysis. Option D. Prioritize the project deadline by conducting the analysis on the raw data and then anonymizing the results, hoping that any potential data exposure during the analysis phase will not be detected. The correct answer is A. Anonymize the client data thoroughly to remove all personally identifiable information before commencing any analysis, ensuring that the analysis is conducted on de-identified data. Explanation: Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Bilfinger employee tasked with managing a project involving sensitive client data. The core difficulty lies in balancing the need for efficient project execution and data analysis with the stringent regulatory requirements for data protection and confidentiality. The employee must navigate potential conflicts between internal project demands and external legal obligations, requiring careful judgment to avoid breaches that could lead to significant financial penalties, reputational damage, and legal repercussions for both Bilfinger and its clients. The pressure to deliver results quickly can create a temptation to bypass established protocols, making adherence to regulatory frameworks paramount. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves prioritizing the secure and compliant handling of client data throughout the project lifecycle. This means implementing robust data anonymization techniques before any analysis is performed, ensuring that no personally identifiable information, PI, is exposed. This aligns directly with the principles of data minimization and purpose limitation, fundamental to data protection regulations. By anonymizing data, the employee upholds Bilfinger's commitment to client confidentiality and adheres to legal obligations regarding the processing of personal data, thereby mitigating risks of unauthorized access or disclosure. This proactive measure demonstrates a commitment to ethical data stewardship and regulatory compliance. Incorrect approach is analysis. An approach that involves directly analyzing raw client data without prior anonymization or explicit consent for such processing is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This directly contravenes data protection principles, risking breaches of confidentiality and potentially violating laws governing the handling of personal information. Such an action could expose Bilfinger to severe penalties, including fines and legal action, and erode client trust. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that internal project needs supersede data protection regulations. This demonstrates a misunderstanding of the absolute priority of legal compliance. Ignoring or downplaying regulatory requirements in favor of expediency is a direct violation of professional duty and legal obligations, leading to the same severe consequences as direct data misuse. Furthermore, attempting to justify the use of raw data by claiming it is for a limited internal audience, without proper access controls or a clear legal basis for such access, is also professionally unacceptable. Regulations typically require a lawful basis for processing and robust security measures, not just assumptions about internal access. This approach fails to acknowledge the inherent risks and the need for documented, compliant procedures. Professional reasoning. Professionals at Bilfinger should adopt a risk-based approach to data handling. This involves 1. Identifying all data involved in a project and classifying it according to sensitivity and regulatory requirements. 2. Understanding the specific legal and regulatory obligations applicable to that data, e.g., GDPR, if applicable to the client's jurisdiction. 3. Implementing appropriate technical and organizational measures to protect the data, such as anonymization, pseudonymization, encryption, and access controls. 4. Seeking legal or compliance department guidance when in doubt about data handling procedures. 5. Documenting all data processing activities and the rationale behind them to demonstrate compliance. 6. Prioritizing compliance and ethical considerations over project timelines when conflicts arise, escalating issues if necessary. Question 19. To address the challenge of a key client offering a significant, unsolicited gift of high monetary value during a project review meeting, which approach best upholds Bilfinger's commitment to ethical conduct and professional integrity? Option A. Accept the gift, as it is a gesture of goodwill from a valued client, and plan to declare it to the company's compliance department after the meeting. Option B. Accept the gift and discreetly keep it, as it was a personal gesture and not directly related to any specific project decision. Option C. Accept the gift without hesitation, assuming it is a standard practice in the client's industry and that no reporting is necessary unless explicitly requested. Option D. Politely decline the gift, explaining that company policy and ethical standards prohibit accepting such items and suggest an alternative, more appropriate form of appreciation if the client insists. The correct answer is D. Politely decline the gift, explaining that company policy and ethical standards prohibit accepting such items and suggest an alternative, more appropriate form of appreciation if the client insists. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Bilfinger employee due to the inherent conflict between a client's request and the company's established ethical guidelines and potentially regulatory requirements regarding the acceptance of gifts or hospitality. Navigating this requires a nuanced understanding of corporate policy, ethical conduct, and the potential for even seemingly innocuous gestures to create perceptions of impropriety or undue influence. The core of the challenge lies in balancing professional courtesy and client relationship management with the imperative to maintain integrity and avoid conflicts of interest. The correct approach involves politely but firmly declining the offer, citing company policy and ethical standards. This upholds Bilfinger's commitment to transparency and integrity, preventing any appearance of favoritism or compromised decision-making. By adhering to established protocols, the employee safeguards both their professional reputation and the company's standing. This aligns with general principles of business ethics and is often reinforced by specific company codes of conduct, which are designed to prevent situations that could lead to bribery, corruption, or conflicts of interest. An incorrect approach of accepting the offer, even with the intention of reporting it later, creates an immediate ethical breach. It bypasses the established control mechanisms designed to prevent such situations from arising in the first place. This could be interpreted as a willingness to overlook or accept potentially inappropriate benefits, thereby undermining the company's ethical framework. Furthermore, it places the employee in a position of having to retroactively justify an action that, by its very nature, could be seen as compromising. Another incorrect approach of accepting the offer and not reporting it is a clear violation of ethical and potentially regulatory standards. This demonstrates a disregard for company policy and a lack of integrity, opening the door to perceptions of corruption or undue influence. Such an action could have severe consequences for both the individual and Bilfinger, including reputational damage and potential legal repercussions, depending on the nature of the gift and the jurisdiction's anti-bribery laws. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve immediate recognition of the potential ethical dilemma. The employee should then consult their company's code of conduct or relevant policies regarding gifts and hospitality. If unsure, seeking guidance from their line manager or the compliance department is crucial. The priority is always to act with integrity and transparency, ensuring that all actions align with Bilfinger's values and any applicable regulations. Question 20. The review process indicates that a Bilfinger project manager has recently entered into a personal relationship with a key subcontractor's lead engineer, who is directly involved in the technical oversight of a significant ongoing Bilfinger construction project. The project manager is aware of this relationship and its potential to create a conflict of interest. What is the most appropriate and professionally responsible course of action for the Bilfinger project manager in this situation? Option A. Discreetly manage the project to ensure no preferential treatment is given, without formally reporting the relationship to Bilfinger management. Option B. Continue to work on the project as usual, assuming the personal relationship will not influence professional judgment or decision-making. Option C. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to their direct line manager and the Bilfinger compliance department, requesting guidance on managing the potential conflict of interest. Option D. Inform the subcontractor's lead engineer that they should seek to have another engineer assigned to the project to avoid any appearance of impropriety. The correct answer is C. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to their direct line manager and the Bilfinger compliance department, requesting guidance on managing the potential conflict of interest. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Bilfinger employee by requiring them to navigate a potential conflict of interest and adhere to strict internal policies and relevant regulatory frameworks. The core difficulty lies in balancing personal relationships with professional obligations and ensuring that all actions are transparent and compliant, thereby safeguarding Bilfinger's reputation and integrity. Careful judgment is required to avoid even the appearance of impropriety. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves immediate and full disclosure of the relationship to the relevant Bilfinger management and compliance department. This aligns with the principle of transparency and proactive risk management. Regulatory frameworks and internal company policies, such as those typically found in large engineering and construction firms like Bilfinger, mandate reporting of potential conflicts of interest to allow for proper assessment and mitigation. This approach ensures that Bilfinger can implement appropriate safeguards, such as reassigning responsibilities or implementing enhanced oversight, to prevent any undue influence or preferential treatment, thereby upholding ethical standards and regulatory compliance. Incorrect approaches analysis. Failing to disclose the relationship and continuing to work on projects where the partner is involved creates a significant conflict of interest. This violates ethical principles of fairness and impartiality and likely breaches Bilfinger's internal code of conduct and potentially regulatory requirements concerning conflicts of interest. Exposes Bilfinger to reputational damage and legal risk. Attempting to manage the situation independently without informing Bilfinger management is also professionally unacceptable. This demonstrates a lack of accountability and a failure to adhere to established reporting protocols. It bypasses the established mechanisms for conflict resolution and risk mitigation, leaving the company vulnerable. Minimizing the significance of the relationship or downplaying its potential impact to management is equally problematic. This constitutes a lack of candor and can be interpreted as an attempt to circumvent reporting obligations. It undermines trust and prevents Bilfinger from making informed decisions about managing the conflict. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing potential conflicts of interest should adopt a proactive and transparent approach. The decision-making framework involves 1. Identifying the potential conflict. 2. Consulting relevant company policies and regulatory guidelines. 3. Immediately disclosing the situation to the appropriate authority within the organization, e.g., line manager, compliance officer. 4. Cooperating fully with the organization's process for assessing and managing the conflict. This ensures that decisions are made in the best interest of the company and in compliance with all applicable rules.